Let's rock, baby.
While developing the next Resident Evil installment Resident Evil 4 for the PlayStation 2, game director Hideki Kamiya aimed to make a more action-oriented game, putting emphasis on cool stylized action. This game's story would revolve around a man named Tony that has superhuman abilities, but because this strayed too far from the survival horror theme that Resident Evil is known for, Shinji Mikami, producer of the Resident Evil games, convinced Hideki Kamiya to steer away from the Resident Evil franchise and create a new franchise. Now that Kamiya was free to do as he pleased, Tony became Dante, and this game would revolve around a world dominated by demons. The gameplay of Devil May Cry was heavily influenced by an old Capcom game Strider, which had over-the-top action that served as an inspiration for the action in Devil May Cry. Another inspiration was a bug in Onimusha Warlords where players were able to keep enemies in the air by attacking them repeatedly. This was implemented in Devil May Cry, where you are now able to juggle enemies by firing your guns and using sword strikes. Kamiya intentionally made Devil May Cry challenging to challenge gamers who usually play more casual games. Finally, in 2001, Devil May Cry was released. The game received lots of positive reviews, with people praising the gameplay, visuals and atmosphere. However, some criticized the difficulty of the game, arguing that this was implemented to extend game time. Still, the majority of gamers were overly positive about this game, which is reflected in the sales, as Devil May Cry sold over 3 million copies and has spawned multiple sequels. Aside from that, Devil May Cry has been recognized as the game that pioneered the character action genre, which are hack and slash games that focus on powerful characters that perform stylish actions. Up to this point, I avoided Devil May Cry because of the rumored unforgiving difficulty, but that changes now as I take on this challenging game. Thus, I can see for myself just how frustrating this game can be and if it holds up over 20 years after its initial release.
Come on, let's go!
The game starts at the Devil May Cry office, where Dante is just minding his business until he is attacked by a stranger named Trish. Dante brushes these attacks off like it's nothing, showing not only Trish but also us the player that Dante is no pushover. Trish informs Dante that she was only testing him and that the so-called Mundus is responsible for the death of his mother and brother. Given that Dante is eager to find his demonic killer to settle the score, he agrees to join Trish, who takes him to Mallet's Island, where Mundus is preparing to make his return. After Trish heads out in a hurry, we get to take control of Dante. From the start, the remnants of a Resident Evil game are still noticeable, as for the first few minutes you don't encounter a single enemy and slowly explore the castle. Only when you pick up a rusty key will you get ambushed by marionettes, and at this point the game truly gets going. Marionettes make for great introductory enemies, as they aren't too challenging while at the same time not being complete pushovers. Overall, the enemy variety in Devil May Cry is great, with the previously mentioned marionettes teaching new players the basics. Since scissors and scythe are much more mobile, forcing you to stay on your feet and utilize both your melee and fire weapons. Shadows are in my opinion the most challenging enemies to deal with, as they are only vulnerable to melee attacks when their body is dispelled. Shadows are extremely agile and can deal a lot of damage with just a single attack, so whenever one appears I'm always at the edge of my seat to make sure I take them down without losing too much health. Beelzebubs are weak on their own but ambush you in great numbers, not to mention that they fly around like crazy, meaning that you can quickly lose track of where they are. Cyclops resemble Phantom and can be relentless in their attacks. Pair two of them together and they can even attack each other, doing the hard work for you. Blades attack you on land and appear in the underwater sections. Sargassos are floating skull demons that put up no fight whatsoever and are easily dealt with. Nobodies are without a doubt the scariest enemy in the game, as they look scary and can even change their size during a fight to deal more damage. And to top it all off, they can even drain your devil trigger gauge meter, which means you need to bring your A game when you face off against these frightening demons. Fetishes look similar to marionettes but are much more deadly and aggressive, as they wield flaming weapons. Frosts, as the name implies, use ice attacks to damage you and fight and behave similarly to blades. You should not waste time while fighting them though, as they can regenerate cut off limbs. And finally, plasmas are shapeshifting electric enemies that can multiply if you attack them with melee weapons. Spamming the attack button will kill most enemies just fine, but if you want to be more stylish you should delay your button input to perform different combos. You start out with your Force Edge but will later also find the Alistair, which functions the same with a few additional moves. Ifrit hits slower but also harder, and near the end you get the Sparta sword. But since I liked the moveset of Alistair the most, I almost exclusively used that weapon and tried out the other weapons only a handful of times. In regards to the firearms, I mostly used Ebony and Ivory, the shotgun and the grenade gun. Aside from that, the needle gun was only used in the underwater sections. My least favorite weapon is definitely the Nightmare Beta, which feels extremely ineffective and even uses your devil trigger gauge for attacks. Thus I only used it once and then switched to the better guns. After obtaining Alistair, Dante can transform into his demonic form known as Devil Trigger. This form uses the devil trigger gauge gauge, so it can't be used endlessly. Luckily, this can be quickly refilled by taunting enemies. This allows players to show their skills, making fun of enemies in their face. What makes this form so effective is that you deal much more damage with faster attacks, and maybe more importantly, in this form you are not knocked back by enemy attacks, which allows you to tank incoming hits to deal the killing blow. While using Alistair, you can also transform into the flying demon. Using Ifrit will give you fire powers in demonic form, and lastly, Sparta has no devil trigger available, making it less appealing to use compared to Alistair and Ifrit. Aside from performing stylish combos, the damage taken and completion time will also affect your mission ranking, which in turn will affect the number of red orbs you will get. Thus, players who are skilled enough to get an S ranking are rewarded with more red orbs. I was never able to get an S ranking on my first playthrough, mostly getting B and C rankings. Red orbs can be used to buy items, new moves, blue orbs that increase your maximum health, purple orbs that increase your devil trigger gauge, and yellow orbs that can be used to respawn, otherwise you have to do the entire mission over again. Luckily, enemies also drop red orbs, and by exploring the level you can find red orb fountains that one hit give you a lot of red orbs. Exploring the areas will also often reward you with green orbs that heal you, or blue orb fragments, and when you collect 4 of these fragments you get a blue orb. They can also be obtained by completing secret missions that are optional challenges where you need to do a specific task. These can be really hard to discover, so if you want to fight them all, it's best to use a guide.
It seems that way.
While marionettes are not too challenging, it won't be long before you will run up to the first wall, which for me was the first boss fight against Phantom, as mindlessly attacking this lava spider will get you killed incredibly quickly, but once I beat him using my last yellow orb, I felt extremely satisfied and was eager to see what other challenges the game had to offer. Luckily, I didn't have to wait long, as in the next mission Dante will face off against Nello Angelo, which is without a doubt my favorite boss fight in the game, and like all the other bosses in the game you will fight him more than once. The reason this boss fight is my favorite is the fact that this feels like an honorable duel between two equals. His attacks are well telegraphed, which makes dodging his attacks much easier. Still, he is no pushover, so you shouldn't get reckless. The third time you fight him, Nello Angelo is revealed to be Dante's brother, who has been brainwashed to do Mundus' bidding, putting an emotional weight to this final encounter. All of this combined makes it the best boss fight in the game for me. After killing Phantom in mission 8, you get to fight the third boss Griffin, and I finally understand what inspired this line from Bayonetta.
Block off, Featherface, or you can stick around and find out the hard way.
Griffin is the easiest boss fight in the game, and while the third time you face off against him he puts up a great fight, as long as you constantly fire your guns and stay mobile you should be fine. Breaking up the combat heavy moments are annoying platforming sections that are frustrating because it is hard to land jumps correctly thanks to the fixed camera angle. Aside from that, there are also basic puzzle sections that never become more difficult than find this item and use it to open a door somewhere else. I don't mind this, as the focus of Devil May Cry is on the combat, and that's where the game truly shines. After solving more puzzles in the castle you will get to the low point of the game in mission 12. I'm of course referring to the first person underwater sections that do add some variety but are not enjoyable whatsoever and are totally unnecessary. Luckily these sections don't last too long, so once they're done you can enjoy the rest of the game, though this does ruin the replay value a bit. After Mundus finishes off Griffin for you, you will repeatedly fight Nightmare, which is unfortunately much less fun to fight, at least in my opinion. This is mostly because Nightmare shoots lots of projectiles that can be difficult to dodge, and you have to smash buttons to be able to damage him, which is just an artificial way to drag out the boss fight. Making the fight even more challenging is the fact that Nightmare can also put you up against Nello Angelo and Phantom if you fail to dodge one of Nightmare's attacks. The third time you encounter Nightmare, Dante tries to save Trish, who is seemingly captured, only for Trish to betray him and reveal that she is actually a spy for the demonic Mundus. Still, even after this revelation, Dante saves her from a near-death experience, though he is done with her, making it clear that he never wants to see her again.
Dante!
Don't come any closer, you devil!
Despite that, he still saves her from Mundus when he confronts the Prince of Darkness. Returning the favor, Trish saves Dante from a deadly beam. This releases Dante's full power, taking the form of his father Sparta. With this power, Dante is ready to take on Mundus. Unfortunately, this takes you to the most frustrating fight. Remember how I said that I didn't like Nightmare because of hard to dodge projectiles? Well, it is even worse in the Mundus boss fight. The first phase plays like a Space Harrier game from the Sega Mega Drive and feels out of place in this game. I never found a tactic that allowed me to take no damage during this phase, so I just moved around in circles and hoped for the best. What makes it even worse is the fact that the second phase of this boss fight can be quite challenging, and if you die during this phase you have to do the entire fight again, which made me quit out of frustration a couple of times. But eventually I was finally able to beat Mundus, so at least Mundus is worthy of being the final boss, as he is without a doubt the hardest boss in the game. After defeating Mundus, Dante leaves his sword and amulet with Trish's body, but it's no time to rest yet, as the castle is collapsing and the now injured Mundus makes a final surprise appearance. Dante is unable to defeat Moonus himself, but out of nowhere Trish makes a return and uses her magic to power up Dante's guns. Dante fires the killing blow, sending Moonus back to the demon world. Dante and Trish escape the collapsing island and use a biplane that's lying around. And this reminds me a lot of the ending of Resident Evil 4. And I'm sure that there are many more similarities that I missed. Once they return to Dante's office, they have teamed up and are now working for the renamed Devil Never Cry, ending the story of the first Devil May Cry.
Let's get it over with in 10 minutes. Can't let a single one of those suckers live.
5 minutes.
More than enough.
So what did I think about this game's story? Well, thanks to the robotic and campy voice acting, the story is so bad that it's good, making the cutscenes a joy to sit through.
Mundus. His heinous ways make me sick, killing even his own, like they were nothing.
Trish. Devils never cry. The sky is fair. It'll always be above everyone's head, no different.
Like the sky. I feel like my heart is becoming clear. The world has the legendary Dark Knight Dante and his sidekick.
I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light.
Finishing Devil May Cry took me just over 6 hours, but if you're a pro and know what you're doing, you can probably beat it much faster. After beating the game, you unlock hard mode, in which you can keep all of your obtained weapons, items and techniques. This mode does not only increase enemy health and damage they deal, but also enemy placement, meaning you will encounter more difficult enemy types much earlier in the game. If this is not challenging enough, you can beat it to unlock the even harder Dante Must Die mode. Graphically, the game still holds up, as the castle is fairly detailed and character and enemy models look quite good for an early PS2 game. What hasn't hold up is the annoying camera, as this is locked in place and can switch between camera angles unannounced, meaning you will often run into walls or other objects. During combat this can be quite annoying because you can be hit by enemies off screen, and it's much harder to target specific enemies when the camera decides to change perspective. Luckily there's at least a great soundtrack that makes the frustrating bits a tiny bit less annoying. Even for someone like me who isn't very good at this game and died lots of times, I still had a great time overall, though there were a few moments where I quit out of frustration. But if you want to get into the character hack and slash genre, this is a great game to start with. It's also clear that the developers experimented with, for example, the underwater sections, and thus Devil May Cry is not as refined as later installments. Still, for the first game in the Devil May Cry series, it does an excellent job, and it has largely stood the test of time over 20 years after its initial release.